Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher. I teach meditation, an ordained minister, and a certified Kilobi inquiries facilitator. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about facts versus judgment or opinion. This is similar to a talk I've done in the past. I think it was called Judgment versus Observation. But I just wanted to readdress this topic. I think it's a very important topic, and I thought of it the other day when I was creating another talk. So I wanted to touch on this again for anyone new. And every time I talk about a subject, I'm going to say slightly different things, and that could be just what somebody needs to hear in order to really hear the message. It could be just the pointer that somebody needs. Before I get into that, I do want to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. They make these talks possible by supporting me with financial contributions. If you'd like to join that community, please check out the links below. There are also links for one-time donations. So if you just like a particular talk or you just want to make a one-time contribution, you can do that as well. Okay, so facts. What is a fact? Fact is something like, I broke my leg. I'm getting a divorce. So-and-so won the election. These are facts, okay? These are not things that we can really debate. So I think in popular culture today and in the media, there's been some confusion about alternate facts and, that facts are whatever you want them to be. No, facts are facts. Basically, there are measurable and distinct events or things that we can measure, and we can see, and we can verify. These are not things that really are up for debate. So those are called facts. Again, I'm getting a divorce. That is a legal procedure. It either happens or it doesn't. It's a little bit like being a little pregnant, right? You're either pregnant or you're not. You're not a little pregnant. You're pregnant or you're not. You're getting divorced or you're not. You broke your leg or you didn't. So these are facts. And these are, again, not really up for debate. It doesn't really matter how spiritual you are, anything like that. A fact is a fact is a fact. What is up for debate and what is really important for someone who is working on a spiritual path is opinion and judgment. So let's take the first example. I broke my leg. I broke my leg. That's terrible. Do you hear it? The fact and then the opinion or the judgment. I broke my leg. Oh, that's terrible. Is it? How do we really know? So again, this is where judgment comes in. And I really like, again, the way A Course in Miracles handles judgment. It basically says you can't judge. Not that you judge or you judge incorrectly, it just basically says you are not capable of judgment. You just don't have enough information. And if we think for a moment and we are somewhat objective, then it's really hard to argue that. A human being has a very limited source of input and information. She really doesn't have the capacity to pass judgment. If there's one being that can pass judgment, it's going to be God, the divine. And from everything that I've seen, experienced, and learned on the spiritual path, basically the divine has one opinion about everything from an ultimate perspective. Okay, again, not from a human perspective, not from a perspective that is time-bound, space-bound, the ultimate perspective. And the ultimate perspective is it's good. It's good. It's hard for us to swallow that as human beings, right? When we look around and we see so much suffering and problems and injustice and inequality, and we can just go on and on and on about how terrible everything is. But again, the divine perspective is not our perspective. It is unbounded, unlimited, beyond time and space. And its judgment is, it's good. It's all good, all of it. So, as human beings, we want to try and notice and catch ourselves when we're passing judgment. Passing judgment on others, like Jesus says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Again, you judge someone as sinning. Jesus is really saying, hey, that's not really your job. And again, if we are really honest, we know in our own heart and mind that we have done what we're accusing the other of doing. Maybe not in the exact same way, maybe not to the same degree. But if we're unable to see this, then chances are we aren't very self-aware. Chances are we are hiding from our own consciousness the reality of our own humanness. You could say our own frailty, our own faults, whatever you want to call it. I don't really see them as faults. I really just see them as our perfect imperfections. As human beings, we aren't really meant to be perfectly perfect. Or you could say that our imperfections are part of our perfection, that it's part of how we are meant to be. And again, the imperfection, the only way we come up with the idea of imperfection is judgment. And that's what this whole talk is about. Really isn't our job to decide what is perfect and what is not perfect, what is imperfect, what is problematic. So the only way we really get to the conclusion that humans are flawed, sinners, imperfect, is because we've already passed judgment. So hopefully you can begin to see how powerful this is in terms of transforming the way that we are experiencing our world. Now the question can arise, why should I care? So what? I judge other people, I judge situations, I decide it's bad, it's evil, it shouldn't be this way. Well, very simply, what I'll share with you is that perspective will cause suffering for you in the long term. In the short term, it might feel really, really good to pass judgment on another, to egoically place yourself above them, right? This is what's happening, is the ego is keeping score and it's saying, they are down here, they did this thing that I would never do. That means I'm relatively raised up, right? I'm better than that. I'm better than them. I would never do that. And so this is the game the ego is playing constantly in one form or another. And we want to get hip to that. We want to see that. So to tease this out a little bit, in my experience, judgment has a certain ethical or moral weight to it. It really tries to put things into a category of rightness, wrongness, goodness, or badness. So again, a fact is just a statement of a condition of space and time. Again, I broke my leg. You either did or you didn't. And we can verify this with measurements, by testing, by observing certain things. Of course, we can also have opinions. Maybe you fall down, you think you broke your leg, you're not sure. Might feel like you broke your leg, but maybe when we verify, we find out that that's not actually the fact. Now again, saying that, oh, well, there's an alternative fact, there's another fact, there's another way of seeing that. No, there isn't. You either broke your leg or you didn't. So I really want to clear that up because, again, there can be a lot of confusion in this day and age about facts and other things like that. Some things are not really up for debate, and we call those facts. So a fact not up for debate, what is up for debate, and what I would encourage you to give up the debate about, is whether that fact is good or bad. I want to share a little story with you that comes from the Taoist tradition, I believe. And the story goes that there is a farmer in China who lives with his son on a small farm, and he has a horse that he uses to plow the field. So the horse is like the farmer's tractor in modern day. Really, really something that the farmer relies on. Very, very important to the productivity of his farm. So one day, the horse escapes and runs away. And the neighbor comes over, the neighboring farmer comes over and finds out about the horse and says, "That's terrible. What are you going to do? Now harvest season's coming up. You're not going to be able to use the horse. You're going to have all these problems without your horse." And the farmer, who's quite wise in the way, the Tao, the ways of the world, he has wisdom. And again, wisdom, we can call it Tao, doesn't belong to one culture. It doesn't belong to one religion. It doesn't belong to any given person. It's just truth. It's just there. So the farmer says, "Well, we'll see," to his neighbor. "We'll see. Is it terrible? We'll see." So a few days later, the horse comes back and it has picked up a wild stallion that it's brought with it. So it went out into the wild and found a partner, a mate, and it came back to the farm and the mate followed it. So now the farmer corrals the horse, brings it into the fence, and now the farmer has potentially 2 horses. Again, this is like a tractor or a car. A horse was not a cheap or easy thing to procure. Very, very important, for your survival on a farm. It's transportation. It helps you do the work, takes the burden off of you, physical labor, helps you haul things. So very, very important contributor on the farm, the horses. So now the farmer has 2 horses. The neighbor comes by, sees the 2 horses. The farmer explains what happened. Neighbor says, "Wow, you're so lucky. That's so great." Again, judgment, not a fact. What is the fact? The fact is now there are 2 horses instead of 1. The fact on the first day was the horse ran away. The good part, the bad part, that's terrible, that's great. The projection into the future, which is usually where the judgment of good and bad are coming from. Okay, it's usually coming from the belief that the mind has enough experience from the past to be able to predict what will happen in the future. This is a really important point here, so you may want to pause and really take that in. The problem, the judgments, come from the idea that I've seen enough in the past and I know enough information that I can predict the outcome in the future, and it's going to be bad. Okay? So again, this is the kind of thing that we want to start to notice. And again, the reason for this is suffering. Very plain and simple, that judgment causes us to suffer for several different reasons. So we want to give it up for a good reason, because it will cause us to suffer. So, horse comes back, brings a mate. In reality, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And the neighbor proclaims it's good news, lucky you. Okay, again, the wise farmer says, "Well, we shall see." Okay, so a wild horse needs to be broken in. What that means is the horse needs to get used to the presence of people, has to get used to a person riding on its back without bucking or throwing it off or throwing a temper tantrum, and that requires skill. And so the next day, the farmer's son begins breaking in the horse, which is not an easy process. And as he's doing this, he gets thrown from the horse and breaks his leg. Now again, on a small little farm like this farmer is running here, pretty much every person is vital to the functioning of the farm. So if you are not present then there's going to be double the work for someone else. It's not like how we live today where we have so much excess and luxury and we can take time off from work and it may not really affect things too much, or they can get someone else to fill in. There's no one else to fill in this instance. It's basically a family-run business. So the son breaks his leg. Again, neighbor comes over, finds out, and says, that's terrible. So if you can see here, you're seeing how the neighbor with every event is basically oscillating between that's terrible, oh, that's great, that's terrible, okay? So again, with no wisdom, with no larger perspective, with just the ego's very limited information, the ego wants to make a statement about reality. It's good, it's bad, it's terrible, it's unjust, it's whatever it is, okay? So, again, the wise farmer says, well, we shall see. Then, the next day, the emperor's army comes through their part of China, recruiting any young man to join the army and potentially die in this upcoming conflict. So if the son was healthy, then the army would basically draft him. There's no choice, there's no debate, just basically take him and put him into service in the army, and he could potentially get killed. And at the very least, he's going to be gone for probably years. So he wouldn't be able to help on the farm because he would be off fighting a war. Best case scenario, he comes back from the war relatively quickly, but remember that in those days, the fastest you could go would be on a horse, and armies didn't have the means to have everyone on a horse. The people on horses were called cavalry, and they were a few. Most soldiers traveled on foot. So in order to get from wherever it is that you are to where you're trying to, wherever the battle is, you're walking on foot. So it's a very slow process. If you think about how fast you can walk, it's not very fast. And if you're moving from one country to another country, you can imagine how long it can take. And you're traveling across rivers and streams and mountains and other obstacles along the way. Many soldiers would simply die on the way to the battle, wouldn't even get to the battle depending on the conditions, okay? So the army comes through and they're drafting all the young men, and they find this young man with a broken leg. So he's useless. They can't have someone with a broken leg marching off to war, so they leave him. So once again, the temptation is to say, good, that's good. It looked like a bad thing, but it turned out to be a good thing. And if you see the story every step of the way, basically that's what we're being shown, is something that looks bad, horse running away, can be interpreted as good the next moment. Horse comes back with another horse. Now you have two horses. Looks like it's good. I have two horses instead of one. Then my son breaks his leg because of one of the horses. Seems like a bad thing. So again, the facts can be separated from our opinion or our judgment about them. And this is something that, a practice that we want to begin doing more and more and more in our lives. We want to start to soften our tendency to believe our judgments. Now, the reason I put it that way is because chances are the judgments will appear. Chances are your mind is just going to generate them. It doesn't mean you're unspiritual, doesn't mean you're evil, it doesn't mean anything. They just tend to pop up. And what we're encouraged to do, what I'm encouraging you to do here, is question those thoughts. Just like in the story, recognize that We don't actually have a crystal ball, do we? And the future doesn't always follow what the past did. There are also innumerable different things happening in the world. And so what our mind predicts is the outcome of a certain fact happening, very often is not the actual outcome. And so we just catch ourselves making those judgments. We catch ourselves having a strong opinion about something. And what we can do is just soften that and question that and begin to create space around that. And usually you will immediately start to feel better, because reality is we don't really know. We don't have enough information to know what the outcome will be. So we just let go of any illusion that we could know. Now again, that doesn't change the facts. The fact is I broke my leg. The fact is I'm getting a divorce. The fact is whatever it might be, my partner cheated on me, I lost my job, all these things that, again, the mind is so quick to hand us a judgment. And again, I really like what the Course in Miracles says about that we are not capable of judgment. We simply do not have enough information. Again, it won't stop your mind from trying to produce a judgment about good and bad. It's unnecessary. Again, we can navigate life without these judgments of good and bad. I broke my leg. What do I need to do? Probably need to go to the hospital. Probably need to get it set. Do I need to decide whether it's good or bad? What if while I'm healing from that wound, I have an idea or inspiration, I write a new song or begin that story, that novel that I've always meant to write, or someone reaches out to me that wouldn't have otherwise reached out. The fact is that you could say there's good and bad in everything. And it really is up to us to decide what we're going to focus on and see. So I can choose to side with the ego, which sides with fear, loss, separation, with lack, and I can see it as bad. There are people like that who they've done studies and they've shown that many people interpret neutral and bad situations as bad, but also neutral situations, they see them as bad. Okay. And then we can also choose to see things in a different light. Again, I don't really think we get to decide whether things are really good or bad. Ultimately, we just don't have the point of view. So it starts becoming about choice. I can choose to see the good in a situation. Now, this can be very difficult when we are under the sway of emotional conditioning. So I do want to mention this because it's not as simple as, oh, I just choose a different thought and I immediately feel better. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But I've gone through personally a very rough patch over the last few years, a lot of loss. I've just had a lot of loss in my career, in my family, romantically, just on almost every level you can think of. I've had to endure quite a bit of loss. And as a result, that has tended to trigger some past wounds, you might say, things that I've not really had to face up until this point. And so now I'm facing with them, dealing with them, integrating those parts of myself. And it's challenging work, but it's work well worth doing. And so again, I can attest that there are times, and these are called Velcro thoughts. One of my teachers calls them Velcro thoughts, where a thought just seems so true and so real. We emotionally our heart and our mind, you could say, are in cahoots. And so the facts seem like they are, they have an emotional truth to them, okay? So again, maybe a loved one dies, and we are, no matter how hard we try, we are really finding it difficult or impossible to find any good in that situation. We just simply can't see it. And again, this is where some of what I've spoken about in the last few weeks comes into play: faith. And having faith and continually inviting in another perspective. What A Course in Miracles says, and the yoga tradition to a degree as well agrees, that we have an inner teacher. The outer teacher, somebody like me who is a spiritual teacher, their job, if you will, is to outwardly express what the inner teacher is saying. But really there's just one teacher in everybody, in all spirituality. And that teacher is inside of each and every one of us. So if I'm doing my job well, then my words and my actions are pointing you toward your inner teacher. And over time, hopefully, what I say will begin to help you tune in to what your inner teacher is saying ultimately. And over time, you learn to listen to that teacher more and more and more. So the practice, when we're in that, and again, I personally am in the throes of this right now, and I have been, is we invite in another perspective. And it can feel like we're abandoned. It can feel like there's no hope. It can feel like, again, we know the facts, and the facts say it's bad, right? It really can feel that way. Like, no, there's no way I can spin this. There's no way I can make it good. But again, we just don't have enough information to judge. We don't have a cosmic view of reality. We have this little slice of our lives. We have our personal memory. But ultimate good, ultimate bad, we don't know. And this is where the teaching from the yoga tradition of karma and reincarnation can be very helpful. Because if we see a bigger picture beyond just this life, then perhaps we can understand that maybe what seems like a curse in this life is something bigger being played out. That maybe the hurt and the pain and the difficulty I'm going through now is helping to ameliorate a past karma. And once that has been taken care of, I will not have to deal with that again in the future. Perhaps something playing out again is a cosmic play of, again, different people having to work out part of their journey and play out their journey with others. So again, what might seem like a fruitless and traumatic event or altercation with somebody, perhaps it served some deeper purpose. And generally when it comes to suffering, in my experience, there's always a lesson to be learned, always. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any suffering. The suffering is telling us that there's something we're missing. There's something we're not seeing. And again, this applies as much to me as anybody else. And I know this. So anytime that I'm suffering, and I think it's because of outside circumstances. This person did this. That person chose that. These events happened. And it's so tempting, isn't it, to believe the ego's perspective, the ego's limited perspective, and to think that facts have judgments tied to them, when in reality, facts are just facts. They're separate from our opinion about them. The truth is that we don't suffer because of facts. We suffer because of our interpretation of facts and events. Okay? So there's no suffering in I'm getting a divorce. There's no suffering in I broke my leg. There might be pain. There might be pain, but there isn't suffering. So physical pain, that's a reality. We can't deny it. But is there suffering there? That depends. That's a psychological thing. And this is one of the great innovations that Buddha really made a major part of his teaching, that you will not suffer because of the facts. You will suffer because of your interpretation of the facts. So this is what we want to be aware of. Notice in your own life, when someone does something and you make a judgment, oh, that was rude. That's your opinion. That's not a fact, okay? The fact is they said certain words. The fact is they said a statement. Interpretation is that was rude. Again, hopefully you can see the moral weight or ethical judgment. Rudeness is not a quantifiable thing. Rudeness is something that we feel. Rudeness is something that we decide. Instead of snapping a judgment, that was rude, we could say, this person seems distressed. Why are they distressed? Maybe they're going through a difficult time. We could ask them how they're doing. We could inquire. We could look into it. Again, a very, very different way of living life. All right, everyone. So I'd love to hear from you. Have you had experience with separating judgment from fact? Is that an easy thing for you to do in your life? Or do you find yourself getting sucked into judgment and opinion and believing these things? And as a result, suffering. How much suffering is there in your life? And again, that's not a judgment on how well you're doing or how enlightened you are or anything like that. But it is a sign. It is an invitation to go deeper. If there's a lot of suffering there, then that is an invitation to look more closely at something. In my life, I have experienced long periods with very little to no suffering. But there are periods like this one that I'm going through now where there's quite a bit of suffering. And what that means is there is something hidden still in the unconscious, a judgment, a belief, an idea that has perhaps been awoken by certain circumstances. Or that maybe there's a new idea that has come in that's beginning to create suffering. This can happen as well. And so again, we want to investigate. We want to look. Like Byron Katie says, anytime you're suffering, it means you're believing something that isn't ultimately true. So if we're suffering, we want to get back to truth, to reality. And again, facts are facts. They're part of reality, but they do not contain judgments. The judgment is in the eye of the beholder. And as the Course in Miracles and as Jesus points out, judge not lest you be judged. When we judge others, we're ultimately judging ourselves. And as much as it seems to the ego like I can judge another and not harm myself, not hurt myself, that is simply not true from a spiritual perspective. That the more judgmental I am of others, the more harsh I am, the more sinning I see, the more depravity I see, then the more I will suffer as a result. All right, everyone, thanks again for listening. I hope you got something from this. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out at any time. And until next time, namaste. Have a beautiful day.